Good afternoon and welcome to the Sunday Times' Bloody Disgrace press conference. The Sunday Times has been a leading voice on the contaminated blood scandal for the past 4 decades. Our ICO, and for me personally, I've been involved in it for more than 20 years. In fact, as a young rookie reporter when I was 21 years old, it was the first story I ever wrote. I had a telephone call from a chap called Mick Mason, who told me an impossibly tragic story about how he had been infected with hepatitis C, HIV, and had even received the devastating news he could have been infected with variant CJD. Mick is here with us today and has lived to tell the tale, unlike so many other people. Today is the culmination of decades of work from leading campaigners and politicians, some of whom are with us today. It's been thanks to a powerful coalition of people that we got the public inquiry in the first place, and that we have seen Sir Brian Langstaff's verdict today, which is a vindication for so much of the work that these brave campaigners have done. His conclusion that this was not an accident should send reverberations through Whitehall. So it's without further ado that I would like to introduce you to some of these campaigners who have joined our Bloody Disgrace campaign, which had the backing of more than 280 politicians. And we're going to start with one of the leading campaigners of the Tainted Blood campaign, Andy Evans, who is its chair. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Caroline. I never thought that this day would come. There were times during the campaign that we felt so down and disheartened that we could never see an end to it. And then one day in 2016, when Theresa May had lost her majority and it looked as if we had an opportunity, these two brave people decided to take that opportunity, put in a debate into Parliament, put in a vote that Theresa May would have lost, and here we are at the end of the public inquiry. I just want to pay tribute to a few people who've helped along the way to get to where we are now. The first is my friend Gareth Lewis. Gareth was one of the first campaigners. He set up the Birchgrove Group in 1993, and he helped me to set up Tainted Blood in 2006. He and his brother Hayden both died in 2010. They should be here to see this inquiry. They should be here to hear the conclusions of Sir Brian Langstaff. There are so many people like Gareth and Hayden that ought to be here but aren't. And part of the reason of that is because of the 40 years that we've been campaigning. It should have been nowhere near that long. If they had done the right thing when it first became apparent that a public inquiry was needed in 1986, so many more people would have achieved the justice that they so deserve. But here we are now, today, and I have to say that this final report of Sir Brian Langstaff is everything that we have been saying over the past 40 years. But it's now been written by a High Court judge in response to a public inquiry. It's an amazing day, as I said, and we're just absolutely overwhelmed and delighted that we're finally on the way to achieving justice. Thank you.
Next we have Diana Johnson, the MP for Hull North, who's also led the campaign in the Commons.
Well, first of all, thank you very much indeed for inviting me along today. And I co-chair the all-party group on haemophilia and contaminated blood. And I can see there are some members in the room of that group. We're a cross-party group of parliamentarians who knew there was a scandal and it needed to be addressed. And I am so grateful for all the support of parliamentarians to get to this point today. And I want to pay tribute, first of all, to Glenn Wilkinson, my constituent, who came to see me in 2010, just as the general election had been called, to tell me that he had received infected blood when he'd had a minor dental operation in Hull at the local hospital and developed hepatitis C. And I said to him, well, look, there's a general election called. If I get re-elected, I'll do what I can to help in the new parliament. And luckily I got in just by 641 votes, so it was a very narrow majority. And since then, I've worked with a number of parliamentarians, Alistair Burt, Andy Burnham, many, many others, to try and secure justice. But I have to say, as Sir Brian says in his report, for years and years the government said nothing to see here. No reason for a public inquiry, nothing to see here. The best treatment available was given, which we now know was not the case. And it was only in 2017 when Theresa May didn't return with the majority she thought she would after that general election. And we got a letter from all the opposition leaders in the House of Commons to say they were so concerned about what Andy Burnham had said in his final speech in Parliament before he left to go on to be the Mayor of Greater Manchester, that I think she was in trouble because she could have lost that first vote in Parliament because the DUP signed that letter as well, and she was obviously courting them at that time. So it was a window of opportunity, and we grabbed it, and I'm so grateful for everything that Caroline did to make this happen, and for all those leaders of those opposition parties. And I also just want to finish by saying there's still work to do. Sir Brian, last April, set out to government, you need to pay compensation. You need to pay interim payments to those who'd not received them, the parents who'd lost children and the children who'd lost parents. And he said to them last year as well, you need to set up a compensation body by the end of last year, ready to pay out. And really sadly, by December, that hadn't happened. And that's why, again, parliamentarians, cross-party came together to actually defeat the government. The first time that the government had been defeated in the 2019 Parliament, because parliamentarians knew there was an injustice and that compensation body needed to be set up and compensation needed to be paid. So I'm very grateful for all the support that we've had cross-party to get to where we are today. And I just want to say to Sir Brian, this report, I think, is a vindication of everything that's been said for the last 40 years by all those brave people who've campaigned through illness, through all the distress that they've had. Thank you so much to Sir Brian, and thank you for inviting me along today.
I'd now like to invite Sir Alistair Burt to talk to us.
Caroline, colleagues, thanks very much indeed. It's a privilege to be here today, not just for the superb exposition of governance that we've just listened to from Sir Brian Langstaff, who embodied everything in terms of diligence, compassion and correctness that those the subject of his inquiry did not, but to speak again with some of those who've been on the long march to make the changes that we're hoping to see. The journey of myself and one of my constituents who is here is one of over 20 years of questions in the House, debates, a meeting with David Cameron in 2013 that we went to, where we detected in him real empathy and compassion, and that something as an element of what would change was on the horizon. And then the lengthy punishing work that Diana refers to of the all-party group, the surveys we ran, the efforts bringing people to the House who were sick of coming to the House of Commons where they had been so often with nothing actually happening. And we did it again and again until something began to change, and then also getting the chance today to be reunited with a number of MPs who've also been doing this job for a long time. There was too much from today just to digest very quickly. I thought key moments were a reminder of the scale of this. When I spoke about it in 2013, at that time it was the 13th biggest civil disaster that had occurred in British history. I think by now the numbers are greater. And it will be an even greater peacetime. And finally, someone was able to say that the loss of papers was deliberate destruction to evade the truth. I want to conclude just as I did so many years ago, and as we should, with the words of those who are really the subject of today. A friend who was told as a child that he had HIV and Hep C and a life expectancy of 4 years if he was lucky said, "I find each and every day is like being on death row for a crime I didn't commit. I long for the day that I can wake up in the morning and not have to fight the government for the right to have a better life." Imagine what it's like to believe for years that what we've been given was an accident. The medical staff constantly told us it was an unavoidable accident, only for us to learn the truth for ourselves. Where did my human rights go as a 12-year-old? And why do I still not have any? When you're stripped of your pride, your dignity, your finances, your job, career, your future, what do you have left? Your spirit in your fight, that's what. Which is why we'll be sitting there on Thursday, and we'll keep coming back until justice is done or the last one of us dies. And I concluded, as MPs, we've been privileged to be given the deepest, most personal details of these people and their loved ones. Some of us have been given family medical records, people's deepest, darkest secrets and their hopes and fears. We've been privileged to have that. The words devastation and struggle appear far too often in the stories we deal with. We're not talking about a tiny handful of people, but about thousands who still feel wronged. As members on both front benches prepare for an election, let us ensure that this Parliament as a whole remains committed to providing, finally, the best closure for those who trust us to do so. Thanks, Caroline, very much.
Can I now invite Lord Owen to speak? Lord Owen was Health Minister between 1974 and 1975.
Well, thank you for asking me. I'm the generation that failed to get an inquiry. Lessons in all of this, that working across parties is sometimes the only way that you can achieve things. And I believe that is one of the strongest lessons that comes from this. Secondly, we should never have accepted blood from countries which we knew were likely to be contaminated. There, the medical profession will have to ask some big questions. I think it was very difficult. It's hard to put yourself in the position of a doctor seeing a haemophiliac child unable to walk because of bleeds in both knees, and they're crying out for a treatment which they know can help. I don't think we did explain enough to patients. What was the problems of this illness? I think the medical profession must ask themselves a lot of questions on all of these issues. It seems to me to be an extremely good report. In my time, the only thing I tried to do was self-sufficiency in British blood for British people, because there was a much better chance of them asking the few questions we had available to us, like, have you ever been yellow? Which is the only way we could try to discover whether somebody had hepatitis. The degree of non-knowledge in those days is amazing, and you must remember it. And you must try in our hearts to put yourself in the position of the parent, even if the doctor has explained fully the facts. Put ourselves in the hands of a doctor whose culture was not to talk about these things anywhere near as much. The medical profession has changed a lot for the better, but there's still a lot to learn. I've only been able to read parts of the report, but it seems to me that the government has now accepted the absolute obligation to be generous to all those who are affected. And I think back, we had our own little Archer inquiry. We were never brave enough to ask for some of the things that have happened. You've achieved a great deal, and the campaigners and the press. The press has been on the side of this campaign in a way which they were not so keen in times past. Anyhow, congratulations. Well done to all those campaigners. You can't bring back people whose lives have lost or have lived in misery, but you can at least pay very, very generous compensation.
And I now invite Andy Burnham.
Thanks, Caroline. Good afternoon, everybody. There are obviously many people gathered here in London today, but others across the country who will now be struggling to process what has been said today and understand why their own country left them in the wilderness for decades. I think everyone needs to recognise in this place, all politicians need to concede that enough wasn't done quickly enough, and it's taken far too long for this day to come. But this day has in the end come down to the efforts of many people in this room. And as Diana said, in 2017, finally I had the evidence that enabled me to say in Parliament that I believed infected blood was an industrial cover-up, a criminal cover-up on an industrial scale. And I believe Sir Brian's report confirms that that is indeed the case. There must be accountability, and there must now be full consideration of prosecutions. And I would include in that the potential for corporate manslaughter charges against Whitehall departments. This report should rock Whitehall to its foundations. This goes to the heart of the way this country has been run. Major questions fall out of it. I believe that we now must see, as a matter of urgency, a full, comprehensive Hillsborough law on the statute book, enacting Sir Brian's recommendation of a statutory duty of candour on senior civil servants. I would go further and say all public servants. They should be tell the truth at the first time of asking. I think huge questions fall out of this for His Majesty's Treasury. The report is quite clear that it was the fear of financial exposure which led to this culture in Whitehall of never admitting any liability, no language that would suggest it. And in my view, that is what's created this situation, that iron grip that was put onto this issue, completely and utterly wrong. And there must be accountability for that. But there have to be questions asked of Parliament too. How has this injustice stood for this long? I said in the Commons after the second